Welcome to the Life in Bomb City podcast. I'm Aaron Faber.
Hi, I'm Dr. Beth Rodriguez.
And we are here live in the Amarillo College Social Sciences department. And we are here visiting. This is actually our first real live video.
Yep.
Technically, it's not live yet because we're recording it and are planning to make it live in the future, but it's a planned eventual live.
The video, right? We have video now, so you can see us.
Yeah, and I'm trying to get better at making these transitions back and forth between the in this program that I'm using. It's not the easiest thing in the world. There is some special options though on it. I mean, I think you can set it up to where it does it automatically based on this. I don't know if it's called a noise gate, based on like the lowest decibel.
Okay.
Like you can set a minimal number, and then if somebody talks into a microphone, it automatically would switch over to that ideally. And I'm hoping to be able to get that set up eventually.
Oh, well, you do a lot of stuff that I wouldn't be able to do. So, well, I'm just glad that we're back because it's been quite a while since we've actually been able to record anything.
It has been. And you know what was funny about that is that we actually recorded a couple of weeks ago. Yeah. And and it's so funny because the live stream that was done did record the video, which is really what we put so much effort into, was getting the video set up because we had never done it before. And then once we got started, I forgot to move the mixer over. So even though the mixer was on and we could hear ourselves in our microphone and our headsets, it wasn't actually running through the video. So, I mean, it's always an incremental, better
learning.
Better
it's
experience.
About learning, right?
Exactly.
It's scaffolding learning business.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
So, anyway, last time we were talking, and by the way, those had those little switches on there. One of the switch screens on there, I think, had the definition for psychopath and the definition for sociopath, but you couldn't hear any of the audio. Yeah. So I was like really glad that at least they had the definitions up there. At least anybody who's having to run their way through that, at least got to see something.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, with regard to that conversation, we were picking up, and we talked a little bit yesterday about what we were planning on moving forward with.
Right.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We kind of just decided that we were going to talk more about the idea of mental health and how we see it in almost everyday life. And I was just telling you right before this that I kind of want to look at and explore and kind of just talk about the idea that I think it's very important that we do talk about mental health. I think it's great. And I think it's amazing that the stigma has actually been a lot lowered. And I think that more people are willing to get help. But I also want to talk about the idea that sometimes we may need some of these, like what we would consider this mental health quirk or symptom in order for people to be successful. And we kind of were bringing up the idea that a lot of times if we were going to look at history and we were looking at the people who really like stood up, made a difference, decided to buck the system, then if we just looked at that individual as that individual and their behaviors and things they're doing, they could actually be seen as somebody who may have a disorder. Namely, more of the whole idea of a sociopath because of a personality disorder. So
one of the people that we talked about the last time was Lyndon Johnson. Of course, we don't have to talk about Lyndon Johnson again, but I mean, to me, the definition of a sociopath is kind of like it kind of seems to fit the personality of somebody who would understand the dynamics of all these different things going on at once that you might have playing out in the Senate or in the House of Representatives, or as the President of the United States, but that probably doesn't necessarily fit the neat description or the neater version of the description of sociopathy. So can you tell our listeners and viewers now what that is exactly?
Well, the idea here is with the sociopath, it is the antisocial personality disorder. And with it, it does say that it is somebody who has the inability to sympathize or empathize with somebody else. They also usually get very frustrated and can't deal with it, become agitated, but they're also very good at speaking. They're very good at manipulating people. They're very good at getting what they want. And a lot of times with that, they often feel like their point of view is the one. Like, it is the one that makes the most sense. They don't really understand other people and why it would, why this action would bother them or why it wouldn't be the best thing for them. And when we look at this with the idea of antisocial, a lot of times we see that narcissistic personality. And it's almost impossible to be a leader of a whole country, especially a democratic country or even a dictator, but to understand and say that I am the best one to represent everybody and to feel like I do have possess those qualities. So you almost have to feel like you're better than people. So we kind of, we perpetuate and kind of reinforce the idea of narcissism a lot of times.
Right. I think that we had talked about or have talked before about the kind of the seamlessness of multiple characteristics, like confidence and arrogance, and like whether or not somebody is just self-aware or they're narcissist, or like what the difference is between self-love and maybe overlove, and those types of things. One and another type of personality that's commonly kind of discussed, I guess, in like as an antisocial personality is like a mobster, or somebody who you mentioned lacks empathy or lacks the ability to consider people outside of themselves having any real value or merit or arguments outside of their own, being right or could be correct or even having the imagination to empathize around that. But I was specifically, I think in a past conversation on a podcast, you and I have talked about the Sopranos. And Tony Soprano is a good example of that, I think, in the like pop culture, because he's always, I think, in towards the very end of the series, I think the second part of the sixth season, which, by the way, I tried to go back and watch that. It's too dark. I can't watch it anymore.
Isn't that funny?
When I was younger, I could watch it. Yeah. But it's too dark now.
It is. It's just kids. Different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's too dark.
It hits different now.
Yeah. Certainly. So anyway, but I remember his doctor specifically didn't want to treat him anymore because she seemed to have come to a realization that he was using her to be a better gangster. Which was a problem for her, because she thought that the whole time she had thought that he had the opportunity to progress. So here's what I want to know.
Okay.
Is it possible of course it's possible. What I mean is and of course it's hard to I'm going to kind of play in my own devil's advocate here.
Okay.
If you had that type of a situation where, you've got an idea, not just like Tony Soprano, who's listening or is, supposedly taking life lessons and trying to apply them and get better. And the idea is that he could get better, or the belief in one of these personality disorders, if you just bring enough, mental, effort to it, then you can make that a healthier situation. Also, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that he didn't progress?
Right. Well, I'll tell you, most of the time, people who have personality disorders often don't think anything's wrong. So when we say this person has a disorder and they're narcissistic or they're antisocial or they're sociopath, whatever it happens to be, a lot of times they don't feel like anything's wrong. So when they talk about it and they learn what they're supposed to say, they aren't really trying to get better. They're just trying to figure out how you want them to act. So they're just manipulative. They're just really good. They're con artists. So a lot of times, are they getting better, or are they just learning what they need to do to play the tricks, to play the game? And the truth is we don't know. And I mean, there's so many issues, and that's the, I wish that we had the thing that we can measure and say, yep, this person has definitely this mental disorder. Yep, they have this. But the idea is with these symptoms, like you were saying, they are so fluid. And it's like anything in like, it's okay if you're doing it, but once it becomes over, like in excess, that's when it becomes an issue. And a lot of times with these personality disorders, the people who have them don't have an issue with it. It's the people in their circle, in their environment, that are reaping the consequences of their behaviors. And so if nobody is having a problem with their behavior, then they technically don't really have the disorder because they're functioning fine.
So are they in treatment in some, in some cases, I'm sure that, but if they're sociopathic, then are they in treatment specifically because other people are telling them somebody has told them at some point they need to be in treatment? Not necessarily because they ever went for the right reasons to begin with?
Usually. It's usually, a lot of times it has to do with law. For some reason the court is ordered or they've done something.
So it makes sense in the context of like a mobster because they've been in trouble in some way in a court, like a judge or somebody has ruled that they, need to be in anger management or something along those lines.
Absolutely. And yes, that's exactly what it is. So a lot of times it's not like, oh, something's wrong and I need to fix it. It's more like, I've made somebody mad. I've broken a law. I've done something that now it's almost like I'm forced to do it. And so a lot of times when you're forced to do it, we don't get anything from it. Like unless somebody, sees these characteristics and they decide, you know what, something is wrong. I am interfering with other people's lives. Something is not right in my life. Then I need to go seek help. Then that's when it's usually effective. But if they're court ordered, a lot of times it's just, they'll do what they need to do to get released out of the court order.
That's funny because like in other instances where that might be the case, it's like, for example, somebody has a heart problem, for example, and people are, they're driving on the road all the time, interacting with people, maybe in some ways more dangerous ways and in more dangerous environments where they're going much faster with, basically driving something that's moving that is made of steel or whatever they make it, the composites they make it out of nowadays that don't last as long as they used to back in the good old days. But if somebody has a heart condition, you're not thinking about that being a ticking issue with an individual behind the wheel. So if it would be kind of like a court ordering that person to go to the gym, and checking them once a week, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if that's an exact parallel, of course not, but it's not
right?
neat. But
so, I'm not going to go to the doctor if nothing is bothering me. I'm not just going to go because somebody's like, oh, that's kind of the same thing. So yeah, I think that's a good parallel to look at. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying like, there's a lot of times like, there's really not, I'm not trying to think of a time, but like even like borderline personality, a lot of times, why people end up in treatment.
What is borderline?
Borderline is when basically the individual doesn't have their own identity. They really attach themselves to somebody else, and that's how they identify. So they form very intense one-sided relationships very quickly. So it's like, I just met you and I want to be your best friend because I need your relationship to identify who I am. Now, when that is not reciprocated, then a lot of times I will respond violently or lash out somehow and try to either isolate us as friends and where you have to count on me, or I will hurt you by, isolating you from everybody else. Lying, rumors. I think the best example, which we were seeing, we saw a lot of, especially in like all the Lifetime movies, was a girl would have a relationship and she'd really like a certain teacher. The teacher would be really nice because they want that student to do a really good job. And all of a sudden she may make a move because she feels like the relationship is more than just teacher-student. And then this teacher would, like, oh no, we're not, that's not what it is. So then she will turn around, even though she loved him, they were in a great relationship as a teacher student. As soon as it didn't escalate where she wanted it to, she now is going to say he raped her, or because now she's wants to hurt him, right? That is borderline, right? It's like all of a sudden that relationship becomes very volatile for some reason.
Wow. It seems like the idea of there being borderline personalities would only get worse when you have folks walking around with, with phones and constantly needing kind of affirmation on their social media platforms. And I mean, I'm not saying that's the only reason people do that. Obviously, it's not. And people can have probably healthy lines and borders, with that stuff, but maybe not always the greatest. And I may be wrong about that. Maybe the whole thing is unhealthy.
Social media is, it's one of those things that we do. I think we're doing research on, but gosh, it needs to be done so much more, because we are seeing that it's almost like people now see social media as a part of their identity, which is part of their personality. And so if they're rejected online, they feel rejected in person. And I mean, as me, like, I don't get that. I really don't. It's really difficult for me to understand how people can be really upset if someone doesn't like a picture they posted. Like, I don't care. I don't care if you don't like it, because I don't see my social media as part of my personality. I think it's just something fun. It's just something to get information out there for people to see things. But if you don't like it, okay.
Yesterday, and this has me thinking about this, because yesterday I was in here with one of our faculty members talking about this upcoming, we're going to present at the ACES conference.
Oh, okay.
And so we're trying to figure out, it's Lauren,
right.
And we're trying to figure out our new government faculty, by the way. Eventually we got to get her on here.
Yeah, she's really good.
I think she's in her office right now, but we can't do that. I don't have the extra gear and the other camera and all that.
That's okay.
I don't have it set up, at least. But we're in here talking about how we would like to be able to introduce, because on social media, one of the things that the big criticisms over the last 20 years, and I think that it's a much larger than anything that's happened in the last 20 years, that political conversations have really taken a nosedive for the worse, and that people have a more difficult time speaking politely and having civil discourse around their political conversation or civic conversations, if that's a civic duty. I'm not positive it's a civic duty to have polite conversations, but I do think it's important to protect commons and having like a common place where people can have conversation,
like a civil conversation.
Yeah, you don't have to be
absolutely.
You don't have to be polite, but it doesn't also have to be perfect conversation either.
Right.
But people can't, for example, be policing words.
Right.
There has to be grace in the system that allows for them to be able to talk, however, using the words that they know, and not what they have been educated to know. And you know what I mean? It's vital that they have those common things that are protected. And I think that's one of the things that we do in our academic environment. We had this part of this ACES conference is we really want to be able to use dilemmas to converse about complex topics like, abortion.
Sure.
Or, as you mentioned a second ago, rape, or something along those lines, because they are really difficult issues to talk about because they involve some of the most important, intimate things that human beings do. Of course, they're going to elicit
emotion,
deep emotional responses. And
absolutely.
we want that. We don't want that to be
we don't want to shut the emotion off of it. No, absolutely. So I've had this conversation, and people often ask, like, why? Why is it now that all of a sudden we have to have we can't have that conversation where people get so angry at the people who are on the other side, and you can't agree to disagree anymore. Like, it's just not there. So I have this idea, this theory about where it came from. Okay. So forever, when we talked about the idea of collectivist and individualist, like cultures, the idea of an individualistic culture is that you are a unique individual to yourself, That you would, if I asked somebody, describe yourself, you would say things like, oh, I'm smart, I'm outgoing, those kinds of things. Now, forever, it used to be United States or the Western Hemisphere was considered to be more individualistic culture, where more of the other side, Asian, is probably the most collectivist culture. Now, the idea here is that you are only as good as your weakest link. The idea is that you're very much about collaboration, about making sure everybody's on the same page and everybody's part of something. Okay. Now, when we look at that, we see if you were going to ask somebody to describe themselves in a collectivist culture, they would say, I'm a friend, a daughter, a sister, right? So they're seeing how they are compared to other people. Now, what has happened is because of social media and because everybody has that contact, we are now the most collectivist culture in the United States that we've ever had before because of the internet. Now, because that's happened, instead of it being where we see like, oh, we're going to take everybody in and we're going to be more collaborative, we're going to be more of this idea that everybody's part of the collective, it is now actually made it to where if you don't agree with me, I have to, I got to cut you off. Because if I agree to disagree with you, your opinions, what I would consider to be, which is different, would be now your faults are part of my group, which I can't have because of that collectivist culture. Instead, I can only have the people who believe the way that I do, that are reinforcing the things that I do, because that is us as a group. The collective has to be the same. And if we do that, we are now totally reinforcing and bringing about the idea of the in-group, out-group, which means we can't agree to disagree.
Right, and which is not a new idea. I mean, people, I think for years have been talking about tribalism and like kind of the moral, I think the moral side to that,
sure.
Which is, and maybe that has something to do with it too. The metropole, as I've heard it talked about with the United States being, a major economic hub for the world, and kind of the global leader in all these different types of services and in the past industry, and the attempt to get some of that
Sure.
back, and not because, by the way, not necessarily because that's what's the right thing to do, but because it's the more secure thing to do.
Right.
And that's fascinating. That's a totally different type of argument, and it's absolutely fascinating.
It is.
But from the state perspective, which is not really a perspective, but rather a function, it absolutely has to do what's the most secure, and not necessarily the most.
Right.
That's what I mean. Yeah, the moral. I mean, we could talk. Well, this is future episodes. That would be perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, this kind of has maybe given more credence to the idea that people, because the interactions that we have with in our businesses and everything else has been maybe more diversified in some way or another, or even the types of ways that people take money, for example, has changed so many, and there's so many different methods for payment. I mean, the transactional culture of that kind of leaks into maybe, and the ability for a shop owner to try to market their products, and on social media, your products are kind of your ideas.
Sure. Yeah.
Being able to selectively, market to specific audiences is one thing that social media it claims to be really good at, and I think it probably is. Quite good at it. Some of the stuff in the past, our podcast things, I mean, it's amazing, and political leanings, and the fact that the amount of information that it's unbelievable how much information even one of these entities by in and of themselves have about an individual person. So do you think that also kind of plays into this, the role you were talking about, individual and collective cultures, and the need to be able to have in-groups, out-groups, kind of going back to an original, I don't know, the original understanding of it maybe among smaller.
Sure, yeah.
And we were not, as a species, weren't really in a metropolitan areas and weren't part of the this huge diversified economy with all these different moving parts and all these different supply chains and you name it. All that. I mean, all that stuff may be a little bit more simple than that.
But I think that a lot of times when we look at it, even though everything is more complicated, everything is definitions of words, different. It's just more complicated because there's more people and there's more things that are involved. I think that in the simplest version, there's a lot of things that are happening that aren't as sophisticated and new that we thought it would be. It's still just that basic baseline of in-group, out-group. Certain behaviors that people need to have or not have. And those I think it's all just, it might be, which sounds kind of crazy, it might be a lot more simple than we make it. I think we as individuals make everything a lot more complicated than it has to be. A lot.
So somebody like Winston Churchill, this is that many say had issues with alcohol and yada. It was an absolute genius with the English language, probably if not one of the greatest, certainly the greatest, I think, in the 20th century. Political figures, and his ability to talk to Americans, not be American, but talk to Americans is even now, I mean, from the grave 60, 70, 80 years later, still captivates with their words and their ability to articulate. Do you really want to take that guy's scotch away?
Yeah.
I mean,
right. And I think that's such a good, it's a good example of when, like, maybe that's maybe what gave it to him. Like, maybe that's what allowed him to feel more creative or be able to speak more freely and come up with information and have that linguistic intelligence that we see from him. But we don't know. But would we want to change it? And the answer is, I wouldn't. There's a lot of things like that we were talking about. And I think it's really interesting is the fact that, we look back at things and we look at them in a different perspective than we do while it's happening. Right. And we kind of looked at this, we were talking about different leaders, how now we may look at them as, oh my gosh, like they're crazy, or that's a personality that we would not want to be able to follow, or I don't understand how people could. And then, but at the time, those people, they didn't see it that way. Right. And kind of like now we would say, oh, he was an alcoholic, he was this and that. But during the time, if we had changed that, would he have been the man that he was with the abilities that he had? And, you just can't change people because when you look back, right?
Right.
It's not different. It's just, that's the way it was. And that's the way it is.
Yeah. The whole William Wallace thing from Braveheart, of course, is not necessarily an accurate historical portrayal or anything, but, I've been given nothing. God makes men who they are.
Yeah.
That whole bit is a fascinating one. And by the way, it kind of brings up another interesting place to go with that topic, because, I mean, how did we get this definition of alcoholism? It doesn't mean it's not to throw doubt onto definitions of everything. That's not the intention, but rather just to ask that seemingly, innocent question. Is it the definition that the CDC provides of that disorder? That is it the person's personal history and past? Is it, whether or not they were, they got a DWI and, were, as you mentioned earlier, ordered by a court to kind of, revise their, or to help them,
great question,
get past something like, and what exactly is it that makes something like that an issue? Because, I mean, it seems like there's a similar thing going on with, sociopathy and psychopathy, and these words are still really new to me. I'm not really very good at pronouncing them, but they're
yes is my answer to that. Really, when we decide, I guess when it's considered to be a disorder, it's interfering with your everyday life, your functioning. If you're not able to function, then now it's seen as a disorder. So if you are drinking, like if we're going to say with alcoholic or addiction, substance abuse addiction is what it's called now, or disorder, I guess it's not really a disorder unless it's not interfering with your everyday life. So are there functioning alcoholics? With the term, the idea is then is that really even a correct term then? If they're functioning alcoholics, then it's not a disorder, is it? I mean, that's the question. So that's exactly what you're saying. And the truth is, I don't know. And that's as soon as it becomes an issue in your daily functioning, that's when it becomes a disorder. That's when it should be now alcoholism, alcoholic. Okay, because we've seen a lot of people who can drink a lot and still function at a high level and do things. Like for some reason, every time I think about drinking and the smoking, I always think of George Burns. And I know that a lot of people don't even know who that is. But I mean, he drank scotch. Well, I think he drank scotch. I don't know what he drank, but he always had some brown liquid and a cigar.
Remind me who George Burns is.
I think he drank and smoked his whole entire life and lived until he was 80, 90 years old. Right. I think he was a late night talk show host. And everybody always uses him as that, oh, well, he drank and smoked his whole life and he was fine. And it's I think it's possible. I think that, that it is possible to have symptoms of what we consider a sociopath, a narcissist, a borderline. And if you're functioning and it hasn't necessarily, you haven't had to run in with the law. You haven't done something that is now like court ordered. Maybe you do. I mean, even though you have the symptoms, is it really the disorder?
Interesting.
Yes.
So part of this is going to be kind of superficially drawn as being, that age-old observation of something just being not a very deep observation, like that there's unfairness going on. Could we also say that, because based on, as part of that argument, could you say that it has to do with how much social power one has, because some folks have more than others, and the ability for them to translate that potential disorder into power can or weaponize their ability to do, whatever we'd say that term, use that term all the time. It's just, it is what it is.
Right.
Does that also, how does that play into the dynamic there of like medical treatment there? Because if it were cancer, it would be much more straightforward.
Absolutely.
This person's going to die if they don't get treatment.
Absolutely.
So, but it's still up to them whether or not they get treatment, but they're going to die if they don't do it.
Absolutely.
As opposed to, this medical, this one is not even like that. If it's it could be court ordered. It could be, it seems as though part of that has to do with the credence that's been given to it as well. And of course, that is not my world. It absolutely needs to be. I don't want to make it sound like I'm.
No.
It's not.
It is. That is. You're on the right route. And that's. Okay. So in the 70s, there was this huge movement where a lot of people said psychology is a quack science because we don't have that answer, like medical. And so there. It's God. Now I can't think of his name, but he David Rosenhan, he decided to do what his an experiment, which he called being sane in insane places, because he was a new psychologist at the time. And he said, you know what, there's just no way that this guy can be right, because we do know if people are crazy or not. And he said, and I'm going to do this research to show him. So what he did is he decided to get himself and 7 of his colleagues. These are all professionals that have never had a disorder. Nothing was wrong. And he convinced them to go to a psychiatric hospital where they were. And all they said to them was, I hear a voice in my head that says dull, empty, and thud. Okay. And when they did, they told them that, and then they answered every other question normally, as nothing else. That was just it. And every single one of them was admitted into the hospital. Okay. David Rosenhan kind of expected that because he knew that was a symptom of a disorder. Okay. 7 of them were admitted with paranoid schizophrenia and 1 with bipolar disorder. Okay. So they were all admitted. But they also thought, okay, yes, I said those words to get admitted, but when I actually meet the attending psychologist, they'll know I'm not crazy, and then I'll get out on that 72, 48-hour waiting period, just depending on the hospital. And what they saw was, on average, they stayed for about 2.5 weeks. Okay, and David Rosenhan actually was there for almost 3 months because he said that the more he protested and said he wasn't crazy and that the crazier they thought he was. They didn't say he was getting better until he said, you know what, you're right, I am crazy. Okay, this plays into this whole thing. Okay, do we really know if it's a disorder or not? If you're able to function and do the things in society, learn or use those possible symptoms such as narcissism, thinking you're better, having that full-on confidence and maybe even arrogance, but to use it in a way that is reinforced or that is seen as something good and powerful, social. Is it a disorder or is it not? And that's the question. I talk about so many things all the time, and the answer, instead of saying is it yes or no, the answer is, it's not one or the other. The answer is yes. It just depends. Every person it depends on, because humans are, when it comes to their mind and their emotions and the things that go with it, are so much more complex than a yes or no.
Okay. So another question is if that's the case, and we have, social sciences are just kind of like that. I mean, they're kind of like that, right? There's a speculative nature to it. Government is like that too, by the way.
Sure.
One thing that I always tell my students is it's extremely arrogant to think that there are. It's delusional to think that there's any one single expert on government.
Sure.
There's not. They don't exist. If they existed, that person would be doing something
right
with the government, or something else. I don't think that they exist.
Right.
And I know that can be controversial in some ways, the idea that a single individual does not exist. But I do think that there are experts in government.
Sure.
People who've expertise in a specific area that is, deeper than levels of general thinking on it. Social sciences are like that.
Absolutely.
So maybe, you mentioned people are different, from case to case. They don't all look the same. And in this example that you brought up there, people were, so to connect that to the social media aspect of what we were kind of talking about earlier, the in-group, out-group, it's almost like they weren't releasing them until they took credit for the fact that they were a part of the out-group, or they were an outlier. And once they admitted it, they were like, okay, now you can be fixed.
Yes.
Right. Now let me fix you. And, let me, that type of thing.
And even though they're like, I'm not crazy, I'm not. And it's like, well, okay, crazy person.
Right.
It's like.
It's awful.
But as soon as they said, you know what, you're right. They're like, oh, look, and now you're getting better. And now they don't see the behaviors, the same behaviors you were doing before, as crazy. It's almost like once we label you as something, then we can have this idea that those behaviors that you're doing reinforce that what we said you had. But as soon as we say you don't have it, those same behaviors can be seen as normal.
Does that have to do with the possibility of being wrong? Like the person would have to admit that they might not be right. And there's a certain disdain for having to do that.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's easier to continue cracking the whip.
Yeah, it's very possible.
That's fascinating.
We do not like to say that we're wrong. We don't once we've made a decision about something, once we have a stereotype, a schema, something that we've already formed, the first impression of somebody, it's really difficult for someone to change it because we don't want to first say that we're wrong. We don't want to change it because it takes time. We really are, our bodies, our minds are what I always say is like the most efficient machine. Like once you do one thing, it will always just go to the automatic if I can. I don't want to have to overwork. And so if I already have a schema or idea of something, then I'm not changing it unless I'm forced to. And the only way that you could be forced to is being faced with something different over and over and over. And then you're like, okay, yeah, I was wrong. So now I have to change it.
You showed, we were talking a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, about these different some of the different biases. And one of them was something Denning bias, had to do with it was a political leaning, or people think they're more something to do with confidence, that they're better at doing something than they
confirmation
are.
bias.
It's like a type of confirmation bias, but it has to do with do with ideas, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was on this website looking up different definitions of those types of biases.
Yeah.
One of the things that I saw in there was planning bias, and I was like, oh wow, I definitely have that, because all my life I've tried to put some things off, and specifically, around, for example, last night I was up here writing really late. I researched though for, probably 4 straight months on the things that I was writing about. I researched, but hadn't written very much. Of course, this was a final exam. It wasn't the paper. The paper that I'd worked on and research had been, that had been very well researched. But when it came to the writing part of it, I thought, I'll get to that as long as if I can research it enough, the writing will come. That's the way that stuff works. That has never been the way that I've successfully written anything, but it seems to go in line with the idea of planning bias.
Sure.
At least the definition that I read on that website, and we need to get that up for people maybe a little bit at a later date. That's just something to think about. When I need to be thinking about specifically around that bias is that is often wrong.
Right. It's funny because we do that, right? We have this idea that, oh yeah, this will work this time, even though it hasn't worked yet. Like it hasn't done it, but we keep going back to it. It's just funny. Like the whole idea that I always do it with my superstitions. Like, okay, there's a pair of shoes that I wore, and that had nothing to do with shoes, but I wore it, and my son was in a basketball game, and he hit another kid and busted his head open. Okay, and it was awful. Like he's standing there, didn't know what happened, and then all of a sudden blood just went pouring down his face, and I'm freaked out. Well, I had these certain shoes on. Guess how often I wear those shoes?
Often.
I don't. Why?
I never wear them.
Because for some reason, I put those shoes with that. And so has it happened again? No, it hasn't. You know why? Because I haven't worn the shoes.
Yeah, that's what it is.
What? Okay, that's a confirmation bias. Like it's not the shoes, but I don't wear them. Now this idea in my head is if I do wear them and then it happens, it's my fault.
Superstitions.
Yeah. And that is a confirmation bias.
But people need to know this also, Dr. Rodriguez, you are more than just Dr. Beth. You're also Coach Beth.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about what the kinds of stuff that you're doing with your?
Jeez. Yeah.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No,
I didn't mean to do that.
No, it's not a problem. I did coach before. I was coaching. Well, actually, I've coached a lot before, but it's been a while. And I kind of was like, I don't want to be in this realm anymore. Not that I don't love it, because I do love it. It's just because the kids. And I really enjoyed watching my kids instead of being the coach, because once I'm in, I'm like in. And it just turned out that I ended up coaching this year. I'm coaching my daughter's club team.
Oh, cool.
And so it means we're traveling a lot. But, one of the reasons I wanted to coach is not just because I wanted her to be on a good team but I wanted to coach because I felt like a lot of the coaches now, and I'm not saying all coaches because there's some great coaches out there. I just felt like when I was watching different coaching, I felt like they're missing out on what I got when I was playing. Like I felt like a lot of my coaches poured into me and made me not just a better player, but a better person. So I was like, that's what I want to do. So I'm really like, that's my goal. And so we've already, we went to a tech game together, and they were the team of the game, and they got to sit and watch actual college players play. And I thought that was important so they could see what level they need to be at. We also volunteered at Colorful Closets because I also feel like they need to understand that it's not just about playing sports, but it's also about being better in your community. Okay. I also, like this, we just had our first tournament and we played well, but there's always better things. And so I did an individual evaluation for each of them and told them, of course, the stuff that I asked them first, what do you think you did good? And then I agreed with them. And then I also told them some of the things that I thought they did good. But I also told them the stuff they have to work on, right? That is part of it. And we had conversations. So I had an individual meeting with each of them in our practice. And I plan on doing that because I feel like that just gives them, steps so that they can get better. And I'm hoping that they see it as not me, constantly getting onto them, but the idea that I am taking the time to pour into them.
For sure. The reason that sounded like a hard right, by the way, going to the coaching after saying superstition. You know why? Do you know why that happened? I think there was a mental shortcut or a cognitive shortcut. You were talking about like a bias, because of a movie that I saw many moons ago. That was Major League. Remember that movie? That hilarious movie with Wild Thing, the guy that the crossbones. There's a guy in there that is one of the players. Of course, they all have their own little superstitions because they're all baseball players. And
oh my gosh, baseball players have the most superstitions.
I don't know the ins and outs of that, but do you remember one of them was one of the players wanted to be able to hit home runs, I think, in one of the biggest games, and he wanted to sacrifice something. A chicken. Yeah. He was gonna sacrifice a whole chicken inside the locker room. That's hilarious. I'm sure that's been done before at some point or another, but
probably,
which is not funny.
No, but just the fact that it was the superstition that he had to have the chicken in order. Yeah. And that's the idea. It's like this. And then when he didn't hit home runs. Right. I think that a lot of times it has to do with that mental block. It has to do with what we have decided is the reason for. And I think that, what's crazy, this is actually going to bring us all the way back to everything else that we've been talking. Once you've decided that this is the reason for your behavior, or if you decide that the disorder is the reason that this is happening, or then the only way to move forward is to fix it, right? To fix what you think is the issue, to fix the mental block that you have, because I can't tell you that this is the problem if that's not what you think is the problem, because then that it's never going to be fixed. Right. Until we have this idea together of this is the problem, this is why you're having it. And that's why when we look at psychologists and we look at people who go to therapy, a lot of times it's just a lot of questions, right? Is because they have to figure out, like, what do you think the issue is? Because that's what we're going to have to do, right? We have to agree on what the issue is and what the problem is so that you will be part of fixing it.
That's fascinating. So, again, doesn't the behavior, so for example, the superstition, and then we'll go ahead and finish up, because we've been talking, can you believe this? We've been 53 minutes or something.
It always goes by so fast.
Yeah, it really does. But that's the way conveation is.
It is.
Really
it should be.
Good. It should be, yeah. Hopefully you're not checking your watch constantly. Going, oh my gosh, I gotta go. But the superstitious behavior like for example, the Jay Boo or whatever that guy's name is that he is sacrificing the chicken to because he wants to hit the home runs. He wants to do it in the locker room in front of everybody.
Right.
It's important to him in that hilarious comedy from the late 80s or something, for him to do that in public and make it publicly for the team to witness,
right?
What he's doing. In some ways, because he's showing the level of care that he has for it, so that in the event that he does fail and doesn't hit the home run, they can see why.
Yeah. And
have an attributable reason for why there was failure, and it doesn't have to be outside circumstances. That's fascinating. I mean, I don't know what the extent to which that is possible, specifically with the superstitious stuff, but it seemed to make sense. Like that, there's especially with like I guess commonly understood patterns of odd, weird things that are happening. I mean, I'm sure that there's more than just that too. But super complex stuff, especially when you get into like religious,
absolutely,
like religious level events, where people are trying to demonstrate the level of care they have for something. In that case, home runs, and making sure that he's
doing everything
he can for the team, for
right.
the team. But demonstrating that in a way that's kind of dramatic. And
it, would probably be seen as an abnormal behavior.
For sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, in the circumstance, right, it's not because it's in for baseball. That's a superstition. But if he was doing it in any other situation, oh my gosh, like something's wrong, right? And that's just another.
Yeah, for sure. That would not be. Yeah. In the locker room, that would be understandable.
Right, because it's a superstition for home runs. Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's weirder superstitions
in
real life, but I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I guess that being said, we're going to try to get better even with the camera switching thing. We're going to have some guests coming up here. One of the people that is going to be joining us in the springtime is Tanner, Dr. Hargrove, who is moved into the office next to and is hired full time, not just moved into the office, but he works.
He's just hanging out here.
He works at Emerald College. He is full time, faculty. We've had him for 2 or 3 years. This is the third year, maybe.
Isn't that funny? I don't even know. Everything goes so fast.
It's crazy, yeah. But he's going to be joining us in the springtime. We've got probably Lauren next door, who's probably going to end up joining us for talk about something with something. Yeah. And we've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, we need to pull some more of these topics.
Absolutely. I think we should talk about AI and how we are seeing how all these old movies are now coming into fruition. Like the Terminator, you guys, every time I talk about robots and I'm like, has nobody seen the Terminator? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the truth. And I mean, there's a lot of evidence now that suggests that like a lot of the developers not only have stepped down with that in mind because they don't want that to to happen, and they see that it's picking, but they're also pushing AIs, or different versions of it to try to protect itself.
Sure.
And seeing how it chooses to do that. Mm-hmm. I guess maybe taking its own, would that be its own shortcuts? Its own
probably.
I guess.
Yes, we're gonna have to talk about that. That's gonna be a good one.
All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll be getting back to you guys here in a couple of weeks. I hope y'all have a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays
and Happy New Year.
Whatever. Happy New Year, 2025.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
All right.
All right. Well, have a wonderful Christmas, everybody. Bye.
Bye.